Hello, my name's Andy Latham and I want to welcome you to our Application Designer App Deployment course. In this course, we're going to be discussing how you take your applications and deploy them from a development environment to a live production environment. As with other courses, there are some prerequisites, but the key one here is that you'll have developed a couple of apps that you can use to experiment with and try and test the knowledge you're going to get in this course. We're going to cover a bit of an overview of deployment. We'll recap on the pertinent app designer features from previous courses, and then we'll get cracking, creating our project, distributing it, and then linking it to another menu system. Deploying your app or solution is a final step in any development, and in my experience is an often forgotten step, culminating either in the developer or technical staff on site copying files manually around the system. This becomes time consuming, it's complex, and it's prone to error. It's therefore important to be able to deploy a solution in a simple, repeatable process that doesn't require a developer or any technical staff to make it work. And this is what we developed with the Application Designer project deployment mechanism. If you are creating a suite of apps for a vertical market, maybe you're a partner or a third-party developer, then having this repeatable deployment is absolutely crucial. And it means that it can be sent electronically and the end user can actually deploy the application themselves. If you're an end user, or citizen developer as we now call them, developing on a separate sandbox system, separate from production, then you will need to use this deployment mechanism to pick up the files from your development environment and move them to the live production environment. But if you're an end user developing on a live system but using the test company, then obviously you don't need this deployment system because you will already have the files in the right directories on your live production system. So what we're going to be doing now is recapping the pertinent app designer features from previous courses. The first thing I want to discuss with you is the directory structure and file names, which we discussed in course 1. Remember that an application must have a 6-character name which fits into the Syspro program naming convention, and the application source text file is named as follows. We have our 6-character name followed by the underscore followed by the word appdesigner.txt. It's important to remember that the txt file contains the entire application that is actually going to be running. It doesn't rely on any other file to define what the application actually does. There is an option within the application details tab for encrypting this txt file to create an additional .snk file, which would be used for deployment, and we'll be discussing that a little bit in a short while. Also remember that you cannot have a name for an application that starts with the same 3 characters as a standard Syspro module. This is to make sure that you don't create an application with the same name as a standard Syspro program. All applications, their .txt file and the .snk files, reside in the base settings app designer folder, which we'll see in a short while is automatically synchronized from the client to the server and from the server to other clients by Syspro in its normal client-server architecture. There are 2 other directories in the App Designer, or rather the base settings App Designer folder. This is one called Projects, which will hold your project files, which we'll discuss later. And also one called Resources, which holds any other files that you may need to support your application, either directly or as part of an implementation or deployment step. The client-server part of Syspro will automatically synchronize anything that you put in base settings App Designer from your client to the server, and then obviously from the server to other clients. So you're not having to deploy your application on all clients around there. Also note, though, that we recognize that the App Designer projects directory and the App Designer resources directory are not synchronized, because we see those as developer-specific folders, and they should remain on the developer client machine. So if you need to put those or save the contents anywhere on the server, you'll need to manually copy them, but they're part of the developer environment, not the deployed runtime environment. I mentioned app encryption earlier on. On the application details tab, there is an option about halfway down. We can see it here on the right-hand side. And if you click this, it will, when it's saving the TXT file, create an encrypted .snk file. And then if you need to deploy your applications to an environment where you do not want people to either change the application or, more importantly, read the text file so they can see what your source code is, then you would deploy the .snk file instead. Just a note of warning, please remember that if you need to amend the application on a customer site, the .txt file will need to be there as well. So you can't just simply deploy the .snk file and then get somebody to say, I need to edit that. And that would rather defeat the object of encrypting it. Okay, next step is documenting the app. Those of you who know me or seen the courses, I'm very passionate about this. This is really to help two classes of people. The first might well be implementers or developers following on from you, your core developer. And in that instance, anybody following in your footsteps will need some guidance on why the app exists, what it does, how it does it, and so on like that. It also ought to help support people. Don't forget that when end users are using your development and they run into difficulties, the first thing they're going to be doing is ringing the support team. And the first thing the support team are going to be looking at is saying, what on earth does this do? So with that in mind, there are a number of places where you can help out. First of all, in application details, there is a section here which, if you fill the details out, which are things like the author, the version, the date, and some notes, this content here will appear automatically in an about option in your app, which you can access by the cogs icon in the top right hand corner, and then it will display a modal window here with the details. So at least there's a good start for a support person to say who wrote it and why does it exist. If you have written any VB script, and some apps don't require any, but if you have, then I strongly advise you to document the code so that anybody following on knows who wrote it, when they wrote it, why they wrote it, and what it does. There's also another category here, and that, God forbid that in the years time somebody comes along and sort of says to you, remember that app that you wrote 52 years ago? Well, it's broken, and how on earth are you going to be able to remember what it did? So for your own sanity, you might want to leave notes for yourself. And then finally, those of you who've seen worked through the course notes, you'll also see that I like to put help buttons and pop up a modal box here or dialog box with some text on explaining what the app is, why it does it, and how it, and so on like that. So they are some 3 areas of documentation. And finally, for those of you who are in the support team looking at these sorts of things, there's one other thing that helps. A standard Syspro program in the top left-hand corner here will have a Syspro logo in the top left-hand corner. An application, or an app designer application, will have a little blue square here. And as soon as somebody sends you a screenshot and there's a little blue square there, you'll know that somebody's written an app that is not standard Syspro, and therefore you may well want to start a different dialogue with them rather than trying to work out what on earth somebody has done with a standard Syspro program. So those are the 3 main areas I wanted to recap on, and the next step is we will nip over now and start to look at how we create a deployment project and what those components are. Before we do that, however, I'd like to introduce you to the new version history feature. This feature has been introduced to assist the Syspro core developers handle changes to apps in the same way that they handle changes to the core product at the moment. The feature down here, version history, is if we click on that, we'll find that we can get a full history of the versioning that's going on. We can add a new version or we can change one. And the sort of detail that you can keep is a version number, the date it was, who did it, an event ID, should you have a link to an event system or not, and then some description. And whilst this has been primarily developed for the Syspro developers, it's extremely useful for partners and citizen developers to keep track of the changes that they do. And I'd strongly recommend that you use this alongside documentation in code and elsewhere. Now, just a point of caution. This is not a version control system. This is just simply keeping a track of what versions and what changes you made to what versions and why. Should you want to, if you've got a working version and you're just adding new features, then I would advise you to copy it before you change it. You can do this in the app designer when you go to open an existing app, or you can simply copy the whole base app, the app designer directory to somewhere else and keep a copy of the change before you do that. I would strongly recommend that you start to adopt these kind of approaches, because fundamentally what you're trying to do here is inform other people of what the changes have been, why they were changed, when they were changed, so that if you should ever have to go back in future, at least you've got a history of what's going on. Anyway, that's a new feature, and let's get on with our projects.